Verse 10 and 11 of chapter 11, Solomon makes this interesting statement. He says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Through the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, and by the mouth of the wicked, it is destroyed. Now, here again, I think really hits on the topic that a lot of people don't avoid, and that's the idea that politics do matter. And when people say, well, Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, I have to point out that they probably don't understand what that word means, because politics is the expression of values and policies that we need to express what our values are, what our policies are, so that the Christian viewpoint is in the marketplace. And if there's anything that's really created a problem is the fact that I think people like Francis Schaeffer pointed out so accurately that Christians have withdrawn from the marketplace. We've kind of exempted ourselves from being involved in politics and in discussions of religion or business or so forth, even the point where we don't even think that biblical concepts have a place in the business place, even though the book of Proverbs is full of all sorts of instructions about how we should do our day-to-day business and how we should manage our daily life. So what he points out here is something I think is obvious. When you have a righteous ruler, I mean, somebody who brings fairness and justice and freedom into the marketplace of ideas and even the marketplace of the literal marketplace, the consequence is the community prospers. Because when people feel safe to think outside of the box, to come up with new ideas, to be creative, to take chances, to invest themselves, well, they are going to find themselves being blessed and being fruitful, and the whole community is going to prosper. And the city, as a result, rejoices. And that's why when we even look back at our history and saying, what were really the great times to live in America, many of us point back to periods where guys like Ronald Reagan were running the country. And even now we're seeing with Trump's first term and now his present term, where the economy is beginning to soar again. We have a 3.8 growth in the economy in just 1 month after living through the last several years with the economy going down. We began to realize that what people really care about is being able to provide for their families, housing, shelter, and so forth. And so we have a responsibility to identify who are the candidates that are most rightly connected to the way of God, the heart of God, the mind of God. And that's becoming increasingly easy for those who take the time to look at it, because many of the candidates now are being so polarized into their different views that it's pretty clear for me as a Christian to know who I should vote for and who I should not vote for. And even if the candidate who has better policies may not be necessarily overtly or outspoken a Christian, but I'm going to support those policies because they align better and create less conflict for me as a follower of Jesus Christ. That's why he said, in contrast, you can identify a wicked person because he said the mouth of the wicked creates dissension and division and disillusion and destruction. And so really that's where we hear terms today of things like democratic socialism, which is really a misleading term, because the idea of being a democracy means that everybody has equality in voice. We don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic where we elect people democratically to serve as our voices in the nation. And if we don't like the way they talk, we can remove them from office. But the real heart of this is socialism, the idea that government manages to an increasing degree the details of your life. One of the things I really appreciate is Winston Churchill's insight into socialism. In fact, he said that there's no perfect system. He says the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. I mean, some people just have more than others. But the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of misery. Socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. And so you realize that socialism at its very heart is contrary to biblical Christianity. And for Christians not to make that difference and see that distinction sets them up for making some pretty bad choices. Because what we hear a lot is we want equity of income or an equity of outcomes. And yet what happens is really what causes a nation to prosper is equality of opportunity. And there is this thing which is mocked again by many liberals of the idea of the trickle-down effect. But the trickle-down effect is really true, that as the people in the highest levels make more money, they spend that money, they invest that money, it becomes part of the marketplace. And as a result, everybody benefits. So that the same dollar gets spent over and over and over again, and people get to share in the wealth. Well, anyway, that's my economic theory, but I think that's really what Scripture is speaking about here. Well, we'll continue tomorrow as we pick it up again in verse 12.